The Desert Phantom. Emily Brown never believed in the supernatural, but the events of that night in the Nevada desert made her question everything she knew about reality. The scorching sun slowly sank below the horizon, painting the endless desert in shades of blood red. Emily walked along the side of the deserted highway, feeling sweat trickle down her back under the weight of her backpack. She was tired but determined to get home. I should have listened to Mom and not tried to save money on tickets, Emily thought, remembering their last conversation. Who knew the bus would break down right here in the middle of nowhere? Suddenly, a gust of wind brought a strange whisper to her ears. Emily looked around, but there was not a soul in sight. Attributing it to fatigue, she continued on her way. Bright headlights suddenly illuminated her figure. An old pickup truck slowly pulled up beside her. Behind the wheel sat a man in his 40s, wearing a worn baseball cap and a plaid shirt. He smiled at Emily, and that smile seemed both friendly and slightly disturbing. "Where you headed, beautiful?" he asked, leaning towards the open window. Emily hesitated for a second. All the warnings about the dangers of hitchhiking raced through her head, but fatigue and the desire to get home soon overcame caution. "Pine Grove," she replied. "It's about 60 miles from here." "Well, ain't that a coincidence?" exclaimed the man. "I'm heading that way myself. Hop in." Emily got into the car and they set off. Jack, as the driver introduced himself, seemed friendly, but something about him made Emily uneasy. She couldn't pinpoint what it was, but she felt a chill run down her spine every time he looked at her. The desert outside the window gradually plunged into darkness, and Emily began to notice strange shadows flickering in her peripheral vision. When she turned to get a better look at them, they disappeared. Do you notice anything strange?" she asked Jack. He chuckled. "There's always something strange in the desert, darling." "Especially at night?" His answer didn't reassure Emily. She began to notice that the landscape outside had changed. Instead of open desert, both sides of the road were now lined with shrubs and sparse trees, which in the darkness looked like ominous silhouettes. "Excuse me," she said, feeling growing concern, "but I think we're going the wrong way. Pine Grove should be more to the right." Jack smiled, but his smile no longer seemed friendly. "Don't worry, honey, I know a shortcut. It'll be quicker this way." Emily tensed up, her heart starting to race. She tried to discreetly check the door handle, but found that the door was locked. Panic began to rise inside her, but she tried to stay calm. The pickup turned onto a narrow dirt road, delving deeper into the desert. Emily frantically tried to figure out what to do. Jump out of the moving car? Try to reason with Jack? Or hope that this really was a shortcut? Suddenly, she noticed that the shadows outside the window began to thicken, taking the form of human figures. They seemed to be running alongside the car, keeping up even at high speed. "Do you see that?" Emily whispered in horror. Jack turned to her and his eyes flashed red for a moment. "Oh yes, I see them every night. They're waiting." The car stopped near an old wooden cabin that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Jack turned off the engine and turned to Emily. "We're here. Get out." "What?" "No, this isn't Pine Grove." Emily couldn't hide the fear in her voice. "Where have you taken me?" Jack smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Somewhere no one will find you." He suddenly grabbed Emily's arm. She screamed and tried to break free, but Jack was much stronger. In panic, she hit him with her free hand, but this only angered her captor. The last thing Emily remembered was a blow to her head and the ensuing darkness. When she regained consciousness, she found herself on a dirty mattress in the cabin. Her hands and feet were tied, and her head was throbbing from the blow. Jack sat in the corner of the room, carving something from a piece of wood with a knife. But what really terrified Emily were the shadows that seemed to have a life of their own, moving along the walls of the room. What is this place?" she whispered. Jack looked up from his work. "This is a place between worlds, darlin'." "Here, reality is flexible. And these shadows? They're the souls of those who came here before you. Soon, you'll join them." Emily closed her eyes, trying to hold back tears. She had to think of something. Find a way to get out of here. But how do you fight something that's beyond understanding? Detective Sarah Collins had never believed in paranormal phenomena, but the investigation of disappearances in the Nevada desert made her question her beliefs. Each missing girl disappeared under similar circumstances, and each time witnesses spoke of strange shadows, an unexplainable phenomena. "Hey, Collins," her partner Detective Martinez's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. "You won't believe what I found." He placed an old photograph on the desk. It showed a man who looked remarkably similar to the description of the suspect given by witnesses. The date on the photo was 1920. "This is impossible," Sarah whispered. "He looks exactly like the sketch." Martinez nodded. "And that's not all. I found mentions of similar disappearances in this area dating back to the beginning of the last century. Always the same: young girls traveling alone, a strange companion, and unexplainable phenomena." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What if we're dealing with something inhuman?" Martinez shrugged. "I don't know. But I do know that there's a girl out there who needs our help. And we have to find her regardless of what we might have to believe." They drove out into the desert, following their intuition and strange signs that seemed to lead them to their goal. At night, the desert transformed, filled with shadows and whispers that couldn't just be a figment of their imagination. Suddenly, they saw an old cabin, as if it had appeared out of nowhere. Next to it stood a pickup truck matching the description given by witnesses. "We're here," said Sarah, feeling adrenaline pulsing through her veins. "Be ready for anything." They jumped out of the car and rushed to the cabin. Sarah kicked down the door and burst inside, gun at the ready. "Police! Don't move!" The scene inside the cabin was surreal. Emily lay bound in the corner, and a man with a knife was leaning over her. But what really shocked Sarah were the living shadows that moved along the walls, as if trying to reach for the people in the room. Jack turned around, his eyes burning with an unnatural red light. "You can't stop me. I'm part of this place. I'm here forever." He lunged at Sarah with inhuman speed, but she managed to fire. The bullet hit Jack in the chest, but instead of blood, sand poured from the wound. He staggered and began to crumble, turning into a pile of sand on the cabin floor. The shadows on the walls thrashed about, letting out a silent scream, and then disappeared as if they had never been there. The cabin began to shake and fall apart around them. "Quickly!" Sarah shouted, rushing to Emily and cutting her bonds. "We need to get out of here!" They ran out of the cabin just as it completely crumbled, turning into a cloud of dust. When the dust settled, only an empty clearing remained where the cabin had been, as if nothing had ever been there. Emily sobbed in Sarah's arms, unable to believe that the nightmare was over. Martinez stood nearby, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. What was that?" he whispered. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to know. The important thing is that we saved her." She looked at Emily. "It's over. You're safe now." Emily nodded, but in her eyes, Sarah could read the same question she was asking herself. Was it really over? Or was this just the beginning of something bigger? Something that goes beyond their understanding? As they drove away, Sarah cast one last glance at the desert through the rearview mirror. For a moment, she thought she saw Jack's figure standing on the road, watching them leave. But when she blinked, the figure was gone, leaving only the endless desert and a mystery that might never be fully solved.